Bing Crosby crooned "White Christmas" to millions, yet at home, his family dreaded the sound of his footsteps. Studios polished reputations while gossip columnists buried the bruises, and he wasn't alone. Behind Hollywood's velvet curtain, massive egos and cruel accounts ran unchecked. Today, we uncover 17 reported stories so notorious, even directors themselves couldn't stand the stars behind them. Number 1. Bing Crosby, the crooner who raised his kids in fear. He was the velvet voice of Christmas, the man whose warm baritone could make an entire nation feel safe during war and depression. But behind the closed doors of his California mansion, Bing Crosby was less a symbol of comfort and more a figure of dread. To his fans, he was Der Bingle, the family man with a pipe and a grin. To his children, he was the judge, the jury, and sometimes the executioner. Gary Crosby, Bing's eldest son, shattered the illusion in his 1983 memoir, Going My Own Way. Within its pages, the image of the genial crooner collapsed. Gary described a father who wielded a studded leather belt with merciless precision, leaving bruises that were supposed to teach discipline, but instead carved fear into memory. "We never knew if it would be a lecture or a lashing," Gary confessed, "but either way, we learned to dread the sound of his footsteps in the hall." The cruelty extended beyond Gary. When his younger brothers misbehaved, Bing would sometimes punish Gary in their place, as if pain were contagious and needed to be spread. Housekeepers in the Crosby home allegedly resorted to what they chillingly called the drowning treatment, holding the boys under bathwater if they dared to speak after bedtime. What outsiders saw as a picture-perfect Catholic household was, by his children's account, a theater of terror. The consequences were devastating. 2 of Crosby's sons later struggled with depression so severe that they ended their own lives. For fans who had once gathered around the radio to hear White Christmas, the revelations were almost unthinkable. The man who crooned of family and holiday warmth had fractured his own beyond repair. Even his professional relationships bore cracks. Though he and Bob Hope appeared inseparable in their Seven Road to comedies, Hope once confided that he detested Crosby off-screen. Their laughter on set was chemistry. Their silence backstage was ice. Bing Crosby's records still spin every December, his voice immortal. Yet behind that sound of comfort lies a story his family could never forget. Hollywood's most beloved crooner, who gave joy to the world but left scars at home. Number 2. Joan Crawford, Mommy Dearest behind the glamour. She was Hollywood royalty, the rags-to-riches star who clawed her way from a Texas laundry to the Oscar stage. Joan Crawford embodied glamour, discipline, and unshakable determination. But beneath the polished surface, Crawford's world was defined not by love, but by control. Her story would become one of the most infamous tales of cruelty in Hollywood history. On screen, Crawford dazzled with performances in Mildred Pierce and Grand Hotel. Off-screen, she ran her home with the rigidity of a movie set, and her children became unwilling extras. Her adopted daughter, Christina, exposed the private torment in the 1978 memoir, Mommy Dearest. Pages detailed beatings, humiliation, and Joan's obsession with order. One scene burned into readers' minds: Christina being yanked from bed in the middle of the night because her mother found a wire hanger in the closet. The tirade, "No wire hangers," became the chilling epitaph to Joan's legacy. Crawford's cruelty was not only private. She turned public feuds into performance art. Her rivalry with Bette Davis on Whatever Happened to Baby Jane was legendary. When Davis was nominated for an Academy Award and Crawford was not, Joan plotted revenge. On Oscar night 1963, she arranged to accept the award on behalf of Anne Bancroft, striding across the stage with Davis fuming in the wings. It was an act of sabotage, dressed as elegance. Even death brought no peace. In her will, Joan cut Christina and her brother Christopher out entirely. leaving them with the infamous line, "It is my intention to make no provision for them." Other adopted children received modest sums, but the fortune was dispersed elsewhere. To some, Joan was a pioneer, a single woman carving her place in a cutthroat system. To others, she was a tyrant who wielded motherhood as a weapon. Friends remembered her as meticulous and magnetic. Enemies remembered her as merciless. Today, her films shimmer in black and white perfection. But for those who lived in her orbit, Crawford's legacy is less about glamour than about fear. A star who demanded devotion, but gave only discipline in return. Number 3. John Wayne, the Duke with divisive beliefs. He was the embodiment of rugged American masculinity, the cowboy who strode across Monument Valley with a rifle in his hands and a squint that promised justice. To millions, John Wayne was not just an actor, but a symbol of the frontier spirit. Yet away from the screen, the Duke carried opinions and behaviors that remain some of the most divisive in Hollywood history. In the early years of his career, Wayne flirted with liberal ideals, even describing himself as a socialist. But as his fame grew, so did his political extremism. By the 1960s, he had become one of Hollywood's most outspoken conservatives, lending his name and support to causes that inflamed an already divided America. He campaigned for Barry Goldwater, who famously opposed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, aligning Wayne with policies that would haunt his legacy. Then came the interview that tarnished him forever. In 1971, speaking with Playboy, Wayne admitted openly that he believed in white supremacy, declaring that African Americans should not hold political office until they were educated to a point of responsibility. He doubled down, dismissing Native American claims to their ancestral lands, saying he didn't feel guilty about their dispossession. These words, cold and unapologetic, stained the reputation of a man whose movies had once stood as wholesome Americana. His arrogance was not confined to politics. On set, Wayne was notorious for throwing his weight around. Directors learned to tread lightly. Younger actors found themselves berated or overshadowed. To his co-stars, he could be both commanding and condescending. A giant who knew his power and wielded it without apology. Yet, the contradictions of Wayne's life made him hard to dismiss entirely. Despite his hostile words toward homosexuality, he forged a close friendship with Rock Hudson, even defending him during Hollywood whispers about Hudson's private life. And though his films endure as cultural monuments, students and activists today debate whether his name should still adorn airports and landmarks. Number 4. Charlie Chaplin, the genius who crushed those around him. To the world, Charlie Chaplin was the little tramp, the bowler hat, the cane, the comic genius who made audiences laugh without a word. But the silence of his films concealed a darker noise, the chaos he created behind the camera and in his personal life. Chaplin was not only a pioneer of cinema, he was also its tyrant, and those who worked with him often paid the price. On set, Chaplin's perfectionism bordered on cruelty. He would demand take after take until actors broke down in exhaustion. Some endured over 100 retakes for a single shot. His pursuit of cinematic brilliance left little room for compassion. Crew members recalled his verbal lashings, tirades that reduced professionals to silence. If a performer failed to meet his impossibly high standards, Chaplin would fire them on the spot, indifferent to the wreckage left behind. But the power he exerted over colleagues was matched, and perhaps exceeded, by the control he demanded in his marriages. Chaplin's relationships were marked by imbalance, secrecy, and scandal. He married 4 times, often to women decades younger than himself. At 29, he wed 16-year-old Lita Gray, a union mired in accusations of cruelty and manipulation. Their divorce became one of the most sensational trials of the 1920s, with Gray's testimony painting Chaplin as a domineering husband who demanded obedience but gave little affection. Affairs trailed him as persistently as his shadow on screen. Infidelity was constant, and Chaplin made little effort to disguise it. His lovers, often aspiring actresses, learned quickly that being close to the great man meant surrendering to his whims. Even his later, seemingly stable marriage to Una O'Neill, daughter of playwright Eugene O'Neill, was scandalous at its start. She was 18. He was 54. Their bond endured until his death, but it created a permanent rupture between Una and her father. Number 5. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckler who left scandal in his wake. Few stars embodied the romance of Golden Age Hollywood like Errol Flynn. With his sword in hand and a devilish grin, he leapt from ships and castle walls, winning hearts as the ultimate swashbuckler in films like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood. But off-screen, the man who seemed to live for adventure carried that recklessness into his private life, leaving behind a trail of scandal, heartbreak, and ruin. Flynn's appetite for pleasure was legendary. Affairs with actresses, models, and socialites filled gossip columns from the late 1930s onward. He relished his reputation as Hollywood's great seducer, often flaunting his conquests with reckless pride. Yet what sounded glamorous in whispers soon became poisonous to his reputation. By the early 1940s, "in like Flynn" was no longer just a playful phrase. It became shorthand for his endless pursuit of women, no matter the cost. The most damaging blows came in 1942, when Flynn faced not one, but 3 separate statutory rape trials. Though acquitted in each case, the headlines alone left scars. His box office appeal dimmed as mothers warned daughters against his charm. Warner Brothers, once proud to parade his dashing image, grew uneasy with the scandals circling their leading man. As the years wore on, Flynn's vices consumed him. His drinking, once romanticized as roguish, ravaged his body. Friends recalled him arriving on set slurring lines or failing to appear altogether. By the 1950s, the swashbuckler's athletic frame had bloated, his once youthful features sagging under the weight of excess. The dashing outlaw of Robin Hood was now cast in roles that mirrored his decline: aging alcoholics, bitter men clinging to former glory. Tragedy struck in 1959 when Flynn died suddenly in Vancouver. The official cause? A heart attack at just 50 years old. Yet the coroner's report shocked the world. His body, it was said, resembled that of a man twice his age, ravaged by years of drink and indulgence. Number 6. Bette Davis, the diva who took no prisoners. Her eyes could cut glass, her voice could freeze a room, and her talent could ignite the screen. Bette Davis was not just an actress, she was a force of nature, one of the first women in Hollywood to fight for respect in an industry dominated by men. But with that power came a ferocity that made her both admired and feared. Davis was a star who demanded excellence and often delivered it through fire rather than kindness. On set, Davis was notorious for her sharp tongue. Directors who crossed her or even hesitated were met with withering scorn. Colleagues described her as brutally honest, a perfectionist who wouldn't tolerate laziness or incompetence. That intensity created unforgettable performances, from Jezebel to All About Eve, but it left bruised egos and bitter memories in its wake. Few actors walked away from a Davis production without a scar, whether from a public tongue-lashing or a cutting remark delivered with surgical precision. Her temper wasn't reserved for work. Davis's legendary feud with Joan Crawford defined an entire era of Hollywood gossip. On the set of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? In 1962, the rivalry turned into open warfare. Davis mocked Crawford's reliance on padded bras. Crawford retaliated by sneaking weights into her costume so Davis would struggle during physical scenes. When Davis received an Oscar nomination for the role, Crawford launched a behind-the-scenes campaign to humiliate her, culminating in Crawford sweeping onto the stage to accept Anne Bancroft's award on her behalf. Their hatred wasn't just tabloid fodder, it was personal, venomous, and unrelenting. But Davis's sharp edges weren't limited to her enemies. Even her closest collaborators admitted she could be brutal. She once reduced a director to tears in a crowded restaurant. And another time she stormed off set mid-shoot, refusing to return until every crew member acknowledged she was right. To Davis, compromise was weakness. To those around her, working with her could feel like walking into battle. Number 7. Orson Welles, the boy wonder who burned bridges. In 1941, Orson Welles was hailed as Hollywood's boy genius. At just 25 years old, he unleashed Citizen Kane, a film so daring, so innovative, that it would later be crowned the greatest ever made. But if the movie cemented Welles's brilliance, his behavior in the years that followed revealed a destructive ego that scorched nearly every relationship he touched. Welles arrived in Hollywood already famous for his War of the Worlds broadcast, which had sent Americans into a panic. Studios granted him unprecedented freedom, final cut, creative control, a blank check to chase his vision. And Welles reveled in that power. But arrogance soon overtook charm. He belittled executives, ignored budgets, and dismissed the advice of allies who had risked their reputations on him. To Welles, compromise was betrayal, and Hollywood would punish him for it. His clashes with RKO over the magnificent Ambersons became legendary. When Welles turned in a cut that ran long and slow, the studio demanded changes. Welles refused, retreating to South America for another project. In his absence, executives hacked the film apart, reshot scenes, and released a gutted version. Welles's fury was volcanic, but he had burned so many bridges that few in Hollywood came to his defense. Friends, too, suffered under his ego. Collaborators who had once been charmed by his charisma later described him as manipulative and dismissive. He demanded loyalty, but rarely returned it. Actors who helped launch his career found themselves discarded once their usefulness waned. Even his second wife, screen siren Rita Hayworth, endured his emotional distance and chronic infidelity before walking away. In later years, Welles became the tragic caricature of wasted genius, hustling for funding, abandoned by studios, his talent dimmed by reputation. He quipped, "I started at the top and worked my way down," a line that captured both his wit and his downfall. Number 8. Frank Sinatra, the crooner with a mean streak. He was Old Blue Eyes, the voice that defined an era, the man who could make a nightclub fall silent with the first note of My Way. But Frank Sinatra's velvet sound masked a personality with edges sharp enough to cut. Behind the spotlight and the martini glass was a temper so explosive that friends, lovers, and rivals alike learned to tread carefully. Sinatra's rise was meteoric, from singing with Tommy Dorsey's orchestra in the 1940s to becoming the face of post-war romance. Yet, as fame inflated, so did his ego. He carried grudges like weapons and unleashed them without hesitation. Journalists who dared criticize him sometimes found themselves banned from his shows, or, more ominously, roughed up by unidentified friends. Sinatra's associations with mob figures were whispered in Hollywood corridors, and while never fully proven, his close ties to men like Sam Giancana added a chilling layer to his reputation. His temper was infamous. Waiters, photographers, even close companions bore the brunt of sudden outbursts. He was known to hurl telephones, smash glasses, or walk out on commitments when his pride was wounded. Directors who challenged him risked scenes being sabotaged or productions stalled. Sinatra didn't just want respect, he demanded it, and punishment followed those who fell short. Romance offered no respite from his volatility. His marriage to Ava Gardner was a whirlwind of passion and destruction, marked by vicious fights, jealous rages, and public humiliations. When she finally left him, Sinatra spiraled into despair, attempting a dramatic exit from life before clawing his way back to success with an Oscar-winning role in From Here to Eternity. Later breakups were no kinder. Lovers who defied him were cut off coldly, their reputations often bruised in the press. Yet, for all his cruelty, Sinatra remained magnetic. His generosity to friends could be as extreme as his punishments to enemies. One night, he'd tear a man apart. The next, he'd quietly pay a struggling actor's hospital bill. It was this contradiction, warmth and wrath, charm and cruelty, that made him both adored and feared. Number 9. Alfred Hitchcock, the master who tormented his muses. He was the master of suspense, the director who turned ordinary staircases and telephone booths into arenas of terror. Alfred Hitchcock transformed cinema, crafting thrillers that still chill audiences today. Yet the true horror wasn't always on screen. It was in the way Hitchcock treated the women who brought his visions to life. Behind the camera, his genius was paired with an obsession that often blurred into cruelty. Hitchcock built his reputation on carefully constructing icy, elegant heroines, the so-called Hitchcock blondes. Grace Kelly, Kim Novak, Janet Leigh, and most infamously, Tippi Hedren, all became subjects of his controlling eye. But what looked glamorous to audiences felt suffocating to those under his gaze. He micromanaged their movements, dictated their costumes, and even interfered with their personal lives, demanding they maintain a cold, flawless image to serve his films. With Hedren, star of The Birds, and Marnie, the torment reached its peak. During filming, Hitchcock insisted on using live birds in attack scenes, leaving her bloodied, bruised, and traumatized. Crew members recalled her breaking down after days of being clawed and pecked, but Hitchcock refused to ease her suffering. Off-set, his obsession grew personal. Hedren later revealed that he stalked her, attempted to control her career, and threatened to destroy her when she resisted his advances. True to his word, after Marnie, he blocked her from major roles, effectively sabotaging her ascent in Hollywood. Even those spared such extremes felt Hitchcock's bite. He had a reputation for cruel jokes, locking actors in rooms, mocking their weight, or subjecting them to humiliating pranks. To him, actors were cattle, mere instruments to be directed, not collaborators to be respected. His cold detachment left emotional scars that often lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. Number 10. Milton Berle, the joke thief who wore out his welcome. For a generation of Americans, Milton Berle was Uncle Milty, the mischievous host who brought comedy into living rooms during television's infancy. He wore outrageous costumes, cracked quick-fire gags, and seemed to embody the spirit of fun. But behind the laugh lines was a performer whose ego and arrogance eventually overshadowed his talent. For many in Hollywood, Berle wasn't a beloved uncle. He was the relative who stayed too long and soured the party. Berle built his empire on quick wit, but fellow comedians whispered a harsher truth. He stole jokes. Known throughout the business as the thief of bad gags, Berle reportedly memorized the routines of his rivals and recycled them as his own. Up-and-coming comics learned to guard their material around him, knowing that if Berle heard it once, it might appear on stage under his name the next night. His defense? I only steal from the best. But what he laughed off as flattery, others called sabotage. His arrogance wasn't confined to the nightclub circuit. When Berle was invited to host Saturday Night Live in 1979, the invitation quickly turned into a disaster. During rehearsals, he attempted to take over the show, rewriting sketches, upstaging cast members, and demanding the spotlight in every scene. By the time the episode aired, his domineering behavior had alienated both the cast and the crew. Lorne Michaels, the show's creator, was so appalled that he banned the episode from reruns for decades, a rare black mark in SNL history. Berle's reputation for backstage arrogance followed him everywhere. Producers dreaded his power plays, directors braced for his interruptions, and co-stars rolled their eyes at his endless need for attention. Even in later years, when his fame had waned, Berle clung to his self-proclaimed status as Mr. Television, often reminding anyone within earshot of his role in shaping the medium. Number 11. Zsa Zsa Gabor, glamour queen who devoured friends and family. Few stars embodied glitz like Zsa Zsa Gabor. With her thick Hungarian accent, dazzling gowns, and string of wealthy husbands, she became a caricature of Hollywood luxury. She was witty, charming, and always ready with a biting one-liner about men and money. But behind the rhinestones and diamonds lay a reputation for selfishness, feuds, and family betrayal. Zsa Zsa was a woman who thrived on attention, even if it came at the expense of those closest to her. Her personal life read like a tabloid serial. Married 9 times, she once quipped, "I am a marvelous housekeeper. Every time I leave a man, I keep his house." The joke masked a trail of broken relationships and public battles, arguments with lovers, slaps thrown at rivals, and courtroom drama became as much her brand as her Hollywood parties. In 1989, she even spent 3 days in jail after famously slapping a Beverly Hills police officer during a traffic stop, a scandal that cemented her as both outrageous and unapologetic. But her most lasting cruelty fell on her only daughter, Francesca Hilton. Early photos showed Zsa Zsa parading Francesca down red carpets, smiling proudly for cameras. Yet as Francesca grew older, their relationship soured. Zsa Zsa reportedly mocked her daughter's looks and ambitions, offering little emotional support. After Conrad Hilton's death, Francesca, heiress to a vast fortune, was shocked to find herself left with only $100,000, a paltry sum compared to her father's empire. Zsa Zsa provided little help as Francesca fought costly legal battles, and mother and daughter often clashed publicly. Francesca spent her final years nearly penniless. Her downfall contrasted cruelly with her mother's diamond-studded lifestyle. Zsa Zsa also made enemies wherever she went. Socialites whispered about her arrogance, while co-stars complained about her inability to share the spotlight. She thrived on scandal, feeding it with sly remarks and staged photo opportunities. To Zsa Zsa, life was performance, and everyone else was either an audience member or a prop. Number 12. Gene Kelly. The dancer who left bruises on screen, Gene Kelly seemed to float. With a smile as bright as a spotlight and movements that defied gravity, he redefined the movie musical in Singin' in the Rain and An American in Paris. He made dancing look effortless, joyous, even romantic. But behind the curtain, Kelly's pursuit of perfection was far from gentle. For his partners, the dreamlike sequences often came with bruises, and sometimes bitterness. Kelly was a relentless taskmaster. He demanded precision from every co-star, every chorus line, every camera operator. Those who danced with him, including legends like Debbie Reynolds and Sid Charisse, recalled the punishing rehearsals. Reynolds once admitted that after days of grueling practice, her feet bled inside her shoes. Charisse's husband would joke that when she came home covered in bruises, he didn't need to ask who she had been rehearsing with. The answer was always Gene. To Kelly, pain was the price of perfection, and his partners paid it in silence for the sake of cinema magic. His temper could be as sharp as his movements. Directors described him as domineering, unwilling to compromise. Crew members endured tirades when shots failed to capture his exact vision. What audiences saw as joy was, behind the camera, forged in sweat, tears, and fear of his wrath. Even outside the studio, Kelly's choices stirred controversy. In 1970, rumors spread that he secretly donated money to the Irish Republican Army, allegedly handing over a check with the words, "This money is for guns." His widow, Patricia Ward Kelly, later denied the story, but the whispers stained his image nonetheless, painting him as a man whose private convictions could be as intense and as divisive as his rehearsals. Number 13. Mickey Rooney, Hollywood's serial husband. Mickey Rooney was once America's boy next door, the plucky, energetic star of Babes in Arms and National Velvet. whose wide grin made him the highest-paid actor of the late 1930s. But as he grew older, his reputation shifted from beloved child star to Hollywood's most restless husband. With 8 marriages, countless affairs, and a penchant for betraying even his closest friends, Rooney's private life was as chaotic as his film career was prolific. His first marriage set the tone. In 1942, Rooney wed Ava Gardner, a stunning beauty just beginning her climb to stardom. The union was brief and explosive, scarred by Rooney's constant infidelities. He bragged about his conquests, treating women as trophies rather than partners. In later years, he even boasted that Gardner was only one among dozens, a shocking admission that tarnished not just his reputation, but hers as well. Rooney's recklessness didn't end with his love life. He frequently betrayed friends and colleagues, sharing intimate gossip in exchange for attention. His autobiography, Life is Too Short, was less a reflective memoir than a tell-all confessional that exposed Hollywood secrets many would have preferred buried. He casually recounted brothel visits with Milton Berle, described Tallulah Bankhead's affairs in lurid detail, and even revealed Judy Garland's private struggles, disclosures that many saw as shameless and cruel. Financial instability added another layer of scandal. Despite earning millions, Rooney squandered his fortune on gambling, bad investments, and impulsive spending. Friends who tried to help often felt used or abandoned once he had what he needed. His charm, once irresistible, curdled into manipulation. By the 1970s, the boy wonder had become a caricature, a punchline about too many wives and too few morals. And yet, Rooney remained defiant. He leaned into the chaos, appearing in talk shows and comedies where he mocked his own excesses. If Hollywood saw him as a scandal, Rooney seemed to embrace it as his final act. Number 14. Judy Garland, the star who wounded as she fell. She was Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, the girl who sang Over the Rainbow and made the world believe in magic. To audiences, Judy Garland was the embodiment of innocence and hope. Yet behind the Technicolor glow lay one of Hollywood's darkest tragedies. Garland was the victim of a brutal studio system that manipulated her body, her voice, and her mind. But as her addictions deepened, she also inflicted wounds on those who loved her most. From her teenage years at MGM, Garland was subjected to cruel control. Executives handed her pep pills to keep her thin and energetic, followed by sedatives to force sleep. She was told she wasn't pretty enough, mocked for her weight, and pitted against other starlets. By her 20s, Garland was already dependent on pills and alcohol just to function. The studio had built a legend, but it had also sown the seeds of her destruction. As her career faltered, Garland's personal life spiraled. Friends and family often found themselves caught in the crossfire of her mood swings and desperate outbursts. She lashed out at colleagues, missing rehearsals, arriving late to shows, or collapsing mid-performance. Concert promoters, who once lined up to book her later, dreaded her name on the marquee. To her children, especially Liza Minnelli and Lorna Luft, Garland was both a loving mother and a volatile presence, a woman who could enchant with affection one night and disappear into addiction the next. Garland's marriages reflected the same turbulence. She cycled through husbands, from band leader David Rose to director Vincente Minnelli to impresario Sid Luft, leaving behind a trail of broken vows and bitter fights. Some tried to protect her, others exploited her. None could save her. By the time of her death in 1969 at just 47, Garland was a shadow of the girl who had once lit up Oz. Her passing from a fatal mix of pills was mourned worldwide, yet those closest to her remembered more than tragedy. They remembered the scars she left in her descent, scars on friends, family, and herself. Number 15. Ava Gardner, the beauty who burned bridges. Ava Gardner was the very definition of screen siren, sultry, magnetic, and impossible to ignore. With roles in films like The Killers and Mogambo, she captivated audiences and left men spellbound. But off-screen, Gardner's passions burned just as hot, and often scorched those who got too close. Her love life was a battlefield, her temper legendary, and her cruel tongue could leave scars as lasting as her beauty. Gardner's romances read like a who's who of Hollywood and high society. She married Mickey Rooney at just 19, but his infidelities quickly destroyed the union. Her second marriage to bandleader Artie Shaw collapsed in only a year, poisoned by fights and mutual disdain. Then came her most notorious pairing, Frank Sinatra. Their affair began while Sinatra was still married to Nancy Barbato, igniting a scandal that nearly ended his career. When he finally left his wife for Gardner, their marriage became a tempest of passion, jealousy, and violence. They fought viciously, reconciled passionately, and ultimately burned each other out. Sinatra would later say, "She's the love of my life." But their union left both battered. Beyond husbands, Gardner's affairs with married men, from bullfighters in Spain to industry titans in Hollywood, became fodder for gossip columnists. She seemed drawn to danger, choosing lovers who came with baggage and scandal attached. To friends, it often looked less like romance and more like self-destruction. Her fiery temper only fueled her reputation. Gardner was quick with a cutting remark, known for humiliating rivals with a single devastating put-down. Reporters who dared cross her often walked away, stung by her wit. Co-stars sometimes fared no better, describing her as unpredictable, alternately charming and cruel. As years passed, Gardner's beauty endured, but her destructive habits, drinking, volatile relationships, reckless decisions, took their toll. By the time she published her memoir, Ava, My Story, she admitted to being her own worst enemy, laughing darkly at the chaos she left behind. Number 16. Humphrey Bogart, a tough guy who didn't know when to stop. On screen, Humphrey Bogart was the ultimate tough guy, the weary detective in The Maltese Falcon, the cynical romantic in Casablanca. He was the man who could deliver a line with a cigarette dangling from his lips and make it sound like scripture. But the Bogart audiences adored for his grit and wit could be far rougher when the cameras stopped rolling. His hard drinking, razor-sharp tongue, and taste for confrontation left even friends wary of his bite. Bogart was no stranger to the bottle. Nights at Hollywood watering holes often ended in chaos, with the actor drinking well past reason. He was a fixture at places like Chasen's and Romanoff's, where his barroom antics became the stuff of legend. Known for instigating verbal sparring matches, he turned wit into a weapon, cutting down rivals and humiliating acquaintances in front of crowds. For some, his barbed remarks were entertaining. For others, they were cruel reminders that Bogey's charm had sharp edges. His temper frequently escalated into physical confrontations. Fellow actors and even close friends sometimes found themselves on the receiving end of his fists. He feuded publicly with studio executives, fought bitterly with rivals, and clashed with directors who tried to rein him in. Once, during a particularly drunken night, he picked a fight so ferocious that even his closest companions questioned whether he'd gone too far. Even in marriage, Bogart's toughness often turned toxic. His early unions were turbulent, marked by arguments and heavy drinking. With Lauren Bacall, his fourth wife, he finally found stability. But even their legendary romance was tempered by Bogart's darker moods. Bacall later admitted that Bogey's wit, while brilliant, could also be cruel, cutting deepest when aimed at those he loved most. Yet for all his flaws, Hollywood tolerated Bogart's behavior. Partly because of his undeniable talent, partly because his off-screen persona seemed to mirror his iconic roles. He was the tough guy who didn't pretend to be anything else. But beneath the legend of the hard-boiled hero was a man who, too often, didn't know when to stop, leaving bruised friendships, wounded egos, and the bitter aftertaste of battles best left unfought. Number 17. Elizabeth Taylor, the siren who stole hearts and husbands. Elizabeth Taylor was Hollywood royalty, a violet-eyed beauty whose presence lit up the screen in Cleopatra, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? She was also the woman whose personal life often eclipsed her professional triumphs. To her fans, she was irresistible. To her critics, she was dangerous. Taylor left behind a trail of broken marriages, stolen husbands, and scandals that made her the ultimate tabloid queen of the Golden Age. Married 8 times to 7 men, Taylor turned matrimony into a revolving door. But it wasn't just the number of marriages, it was how they began. Her most infamous scandal erupted in 1958 when she began an affair with singer Eddie Fisher. The problem? Fisher was married at the time to Taylor's best friend, Debbie Reynolds. The betrayal made headlines around the world. When Fisher divorced Reynolds to wed Taylor, America's sweetheart was left humiliated, and Taylor's reputation as a homewrecker was cemented. But Fisher wasn't her last conquest. On the set of Cleopatra, Taylor's torrid affair with Richard Burton ignited one of Hollywood's greatest scandals. Both were married when their romance began, and both left their spouses in the wake of their passion. The Taylor-Burton marriage was volcanic, filled with love, jealousy, public fights, and 2 separate trips to the altar. They were dubbed the Battling Burtons, but their union became as famous as any of their films. Taylor's scandals didn't stop at romance. Financial disputes followed her, from bitter divorce settlements to accusations of reckless spending. She was famous for her jewels, including the 69-carat Taylor-Burton diamond, and infamous for her extravagance. Critics called her greedy. She called herself unapologetic. Yet for all the chaos, Elizabeth Taylor remained magnetic. She was flawed, fiery, and fearless, unafraid to chase what and who she wanted. Her trail of scandals only deepened her mystique, making her both envied and resented. Number 18. Marlon Brando, the rebel who left chaos behind. Marlon Brando revolutionized acting. With A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront, he introduced raw emotion and unpredictability, ushering in a new era of performance. On screen, he was magnetic, a rebel who could whisper a line and make it thunder. Off-screen, however, Brando lived in perpetual rebellion, leaving behind a storm of broken families, sabotaged productions, and scars on those who dared to love him. Brando's personal life was a maze of fractured relationships. He fathered at least 11 children, but his presence as a father was often fleeting. Several of his children later spoke of abandonment, of a man more devoted to his art and appetites than to family stability. His indifference left wounds that no fame or fortune could heal, and tragedy haunted his household for decades, from addiction struggles to untimely deaths. On set, Brando's talent was matched by his volatility. Directors found him unpredictable, sometimes brilliant, other times deliberately sabotaging his own films. During Mutiny on the Bounty, 1962, he clashed so bitterly with crew and producers that the production spiraled out of control, going wildly over budget. Brando's demands, delays, and tantrums helped turn the film into one of Hollywood's most infamous disasters, and studios learned that hiring him meant courting chaos. His lovers bore the brunt of his emotional cruelty. Brando's charm drew women and men into his orbit, but he was restless and often unkind. Affairs were frequent, jealousy explosive, and betrayals routine. He could be tender one day and cruelly dismissive the next, leaving partners devastated. Actress Rita Moreno, who endured an 8-year relationship with him, later revealed that his infidelity and manipulation drove her to despair. Hollywood's golden glow hid shadows of betrayal, cruelty, and broken dreams. These stars left us dazzled on screen, but scarred behind the curtain. Which story struck you most? Share your thoughts below, and join us by liking and subscribing for more untold truths from cinema's darkest corners.